How you set it up?
Sort of like, have like,
I'd like to call to order the November 13th, 2017 regular meeting of the Rutherford Board of Education. I ask all to stand and salute the flag behind us.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, and thank you for attending this evening. I would ask the secretary to please call the roll.
Mrs. Ahmed?
Here.
Mr. Healy?
here.
Mrs. Jones?
Present.
Mrs. Librera?
Here.
Mr. Mazzone?
Here.
Dr. Racine?
Here.
Mr. Rowland?
Here.
Mr. McLean?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. The New Jersey Open Public Meetings Act was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of and to attend the meetings of public bodies at which any business affecting their interest is discussed or acted upon. In accordance with the provisions of this act, the Rutherford Board of Education has caused notice of this meeting to be published by having the date, time, and place posted on the bulletin board outside of the Borough Clerk's office, mailed to the Herald, South Bergenite, and Record newspapers, and filed with the Borough Clerk. Hard copies of the agenda are available in this meeting room, and the agenda is posted electronically to the district's website at www.rutherfordschools.org. Regular meetings of the Rutherford Board of Education will be broadcast without editing during a 2-hour segment as limited by Comcast time constraints on Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. on Comcast Public Access Channel and on FiOS Channel 38. A video of the meeting can also be viewed at the website www.rutherfordschools.org. The video link can be found by opening the Board of Education link and clicking on Public Meetings and then Videos. Any member of the public who wishes to view a DVD of the meeting can make that request in writing to the Board Secretary. We have a special event here this evening. We are going to swear in our newest member of the board, and I would ask Mr. Kelly to please.
This is the required oath for school board members. Would you please raise your right hand and repeat after me? I state your name.
I, Sergio Velati,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey,
and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey,
and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same
and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same
and to the governments established in the United States
and to the government established in the United States
and this state
and this state
under the authority of the people, so help me God.
under the authority of the people, so help me God.
I state your name.
I, Sergio Velati,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I possess the qualifications prescribed by law
that I possess the qualifications prescribed by law
for the office of member of a Board of Education,
for the office of member of a Board of Education,
and that I will faithfully, impartially, and justly
and that I will faithfully, impartially, and justly
perform all the duties of that office
impartially and justly perform all of the duties of that office
according to the best of my ability, so help me God.
according to the best of my ability, so help me God.
Thank you very much. Please take your seat.
Welcome.
Thank you. Yes.
Funny room. He fidgets on the end.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Welcome, Mr. Alati. In your packets were the minutes from the regular meeting of October 23rd, 2017, and the executive session of October 23rd, 2017. Does anyone have any corrections or changes to offer for those minutes? Hearing none, we would ask the secretary to please enter them into the record. We have a couple of special presentations this evening. The first one of which is to recognize a former board member, and I would ask Mr. Hurley to please introduce that.
Sure. Good evening and welcome to Dr. Alati, but Dr. Alati is up here on the board as this past fall Mr. Keith Chu has stepped down from his seat on the board. Mr. Chu came to the board in 2014. He served as chairman of our policy committee, which in the past year had a major undertaking of going through the entire policy and moving into a whole new manual with Strauss-Esme. And Mr. Chu used, I think, a great deal of insight and analysis and also organization to make sure that it was done working with the administration in a timely fashion without getting bogged down with the details that were overwhelming in this 2,000-page manual. He really guided the policy committee through that process. He also was a member of our personnel committee and also was a member of our strategic planning committee, which came into play at his first year on the board and has been instrumental in moving to the larger long-term strategic planning committee, which has led us to some of the discussions we're having now about facilities and looking ahead to the future. Mr. Chu also was always a valuable resource on the board with his profession coming from the world of academia. He was able to see through the eyes of the educator, work with members of the board who come from different venues, and also as a parent of students in town, brought that insight. So we thank Keith for his years of service, and we look forward to continue to work with him in whatever capacity he chooses, whether it be out in the audience like he is tonight, or whether someday it's back up here on the table. So I believe we have something that Mr. McLean would like to present to you.
Yes, before I come up and give that to you, your fellow board members or former fellow board members wanted to thank you. I think it's we all recognize this takes a sacrifice of the people who do it, but also the families that they're leaving to do it. And no matter how long or short someone's service is, all of the service is appreciated and is beneficial to the community. So we're happy to have a new member join us. We're sorry to see a former member who had to go, but all in all, we feel the board remains strong, and in no small part because of your contribution. So we appreciate that, and have a small present that we'd like to give you. Thank you. I'm going to make a little departure from the written agenda. The next presentation was going to be related to a presentation by our architect, but I'd like to skip ahead just for a moment to the report of our student representative, give you a chance to do that, and then if you have to scurry on to some studies, that would be fine. Thank you.
So going over sports. As of last week, volleyball, boys cross country, and football were the last teams left. But all three sports were league champions. Volleyball lost, I believe it was Wednesday last week, in their state sectional to Pagoda. It was a tremendous match. It was crazy. They won the first game, and they lost the second game. And the third game, we were so close, but then unfortunately lost. Boys cross country, we qualified in the state sectional meet, moved on to our state group meet, and then we unfortunately lost there. That ended our season 2 days ago. Football, I'm sure you all heard of this, but yeah, fantastic season so far. They have no losses. We have our next game qualifying for the sectional state semifinal, which is this Friday at 7 o'clock, Tron Field. We need as much support as we can get. Everyone is.
Tell me it won't be as cold as it was last
Oh,
week.
It was cold
That-
last Friday.
yeah,
It was really
it's gonna be
out
cold
there.
again, but it'll be better. Yeah, so if we win this game, we move on to MetLife. We're playing Lenape Valley, and yeah, it's gonna be an interesting game. So looking at the rest of the month, the 17th and 18th is our school play. Then we have the 21st is our varsity dinner. So our all sports booster dinner recognizes varsity athletes and their performance and accomplishments. And then, we also have our project graduation volleyball tournament, the 16th. So
What is that?
project graduation volleyball tournament. So it's basically a
No.
fundraiser.
When is it?
Oh, the 16th, Thursday.
Thursday.
Yeah, this
Night?
Thursday. Yeah, at night. Yeah.
Here,
So,
7
yeah,
o'clock,
here.
8 o'clock?
Yeah, 100 gym. I think 7. I think it's 7. Yeah. But yeah, that's about it for the month.
Very good, thank you. Any questions?
Well, just to
or comments?
piggyback on that, Mrs. Jones is going to attend booster dinner. There is the opportunity for one other board member. If anyone's interested, you can let me know tonight. And congratulations to Mr. Sullivan and his team.
Job.
Successful cross-country career, and now you move on, right, to indoor? Yep, soon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, you know, it's it really does. I mean, I know it's being in the high school for so many years, when you have the kind of fall season, you see the student body sitting together and brings everybody together. The game against Hasbrook Heights was televised on FiOS, and watching it was really pretty neat. Because, you know, first of all, the way they've come with small productions, you thought you were watching ESPN, but it was just, the announcers kept referring to the enthusiasm and the positive enthusiasm of the student body, at least 7 or 8 times in the broadcast, it was shown on delay later in the week. And I thought that was as important, if not more important, than the outcome of the game. The positive comments that were made repeatedly by strangers to us, you know, coming in for files about our student body. So congratulations to that.
Yeah, after that Hasbrook Heights game, I don't know if you guys know, but Hasbrook Heights was on a 19 win streak. They've been winning every game for a few seasons now, and this year Rutherford's team broke that. So after that match, like, I don't know, the student body just got this huge positive uplift, and then yeah,
Well, this year.
at every game now,
Great.
it's great.
Great.
It is.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the report. And as I said, we'll take a few moments if you have something you'd like to attend to the next.
Thank you.
you.
Have a good night.
Thanks, Dan. Happy Thanksgiving.
Yes. Happy Thanksgiving. So we'll move now on the agenda to a special presentation by our architect, Mr. Chapin, regarding the work that's being done pre-referendum.
Thank you. I'm going to hand out the copies of some of this so that it helps you to follow along.
Sure.
Thank you.
Be careful with the cords. Thanks.
Thanks.
So just before they begin, and I think that we're all aware of this, the reason that we've asked them to come in and address some of these pre-referendum work and costs is that during our last meeting we had a long and spirited conversation about them, and I think the kind of overall view of this is that we know that we won't make a final decision about going to referendum or what that means until the February time frame. but there's a lot of activity that has to take place ahead of that, even so we can quantify, with more detail, costs associated with that, projections, that sort of thing. I think we were, as a board, taken a little bit by surprise by the magnitude, so we wanted to understand what's behind those numbers, and how you go about making those estimates, and what of it's really kind of a sunk cost for us, regardless of if we go or don't go, and how we're going to manage that. Mr. Kelly has looked at. So please, thank you.
Thank you. This is a major project, and it has a lot of moving parts to it. And so illustrating that and trying to get understanding of all those pieces is a difficult task for us. Our previous memo was only a couple of pages and described this multifaceted process in rather general terms.
Is that able to lift up a little bit, Ken?
Is that better?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
Okay. So, as I understand it, there were 4 major points that needed clarification, and we tried to illustrate that information in this supplementary memorandum. So the first point was how we had documented our our consultant proposals and selections, and how we did that process. So the first element is that we don't consider price only. We consider many factors in that, and I've kind of itemized them here in these sub-bullets. The fit of the consultant's profile is the most important aspect. You have a unique set of requirements here, and we have to match up that with the expertise of the known sources for these services, and that's where our selection process actually begins. The second thing is that we have to make sure they understand the service requests that we're putting forward to them, and there's an example of that toward the end of this presentation, where I think you'll see how much difference it makes to make sure that we get that second point clarified. The past performance record. The firm has a long history. Next year is the 30th anniversary. We're going to have some special celebrations about that. The past performance of the consultants is a very important thing, because they are representatives of our service profile. And so we don't put anybody in that position that can't serve optimally. And the last thing is the fees. And I pointed out here that they have to meet our value expectation. We're in this industry a long time. We know what those values should be, and recognizing that all of the sum of these many pieces is what brings that figure up so high. It still is vetted by us first before it is presented to the district. The largest single number was from Brinkerhoff Environmental, and it's because they were doing a great many of these core facilities that are related to the Department of Environmental Protection. We saw that number, that fee number, on the environmental side and questioned it ourselves, and went into every single service that made up that profile to make sure that the value was where it needed to be. And so that was something that was done, and John can tell you a little bit more about the subsequent vetting that has been taking place.
Well, we've also, in the past, we've done some vetting over the last 10 years or so, where we've done comparisons to environmental, civil engineering, other engineer consultants. So we have done that with civil engineers for other referendum projects and other just capital improvement projects. But knowing that the board had a concern, we went ahead and reached out to French and Perillo gave them the same scope of services that Brinkerhoff was given, and they basically came in within 1%, a little bit higher overall number than Brinkerhoff on the environmental side, and a little bit less than 1% on the civil engineering side. So we went through and vetted that out, and happy to say that the numbers were similar. Just as a point of reference for all the consultants for these projects, Perrette Somgen puts no markup on them. It's just a straight pass-through. I do have a sample of one of these EO 215s and the assessment reports just for one school. I can show you.
I made him carry the sample.
This is just one example of a previous job we just did in Middlesex. That's just for one school. So just to give you an idea, and this is double-sided, of all the information that they're gathering. Some of the examples, if you want, for engineers that we've looked at in the past were KSE, CMX, Shore de Palma, Edwards, French and Perillo, and East Point Engineers, just to name a few.
Are there any other questions relating to that selection process? Yes.
I have a question. So the figure for the environmental assessments, it's categorized as just environmental on the estimate sheet.
Right.
Can you share with the board the line items that add up to that amount for each of the schools? Is that in the packet?
It's point 2 in this memorandum on the second page. I mean, the footnotes give some of the explanation of this, but I think the answer to your question lies on this second page.
Well, these are the components, but I'm actually asking for the line items with the estimate that adds up to the amount that's on the summary table that you've provided. Is that something that you can provide to the board, if not tonight, at another date?
We'd have to give them Brinkerhoff's proposal.
Yeah, we can give you the breakdown.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. The heart of this work is related to these first two items, the Madden legislation and Executive Order 215. Brinkerhoff provides this licensed site remediation professional, and they handle the liaison with the DEP. And we've noted here that which schools this applies to. Is anybody having difficulty with my shorthand on the school designations? I think we've done it that way to keep the memorandum as brief as possible. It's important to note that Washington doesn't have these triggers. But as you go through this list of 4 steps, it applies to the high school, Union, Pierpont, and the kindergarten center on all of them. And those are the 4 that had the highest, when you looked at the breakdown chart, the 31,100 cost. Those are the ones that had that high cost. And some of the others, Lincoln and Washington, don't have all of those. And we've tried in this memorandum to explain the basis of that choice. You do have archaeological survey requirements because this area was colonial and it was Indian before that. So that's one of the due diligence pieces that's necessary. environmental assessment, I want to point out, under the EO 215 regulation, is either level 1 or level 2. All of the projects that are being considered are level 1. That's the lower level. It excludes the environmental impact statement. You don't have to go to that more extensive criteria. You can go to an environmental assessment. And so you don't reach the 5-acre trigger on any of your sites. So as large as these figures are, this is the less expensive level of investigation. Now, we will provide that breakdown so that you can see that. Are there any other specific questions on the pieces of this analysis that have to be done? Yes.
Mr. Chapin, am I to understand that this has nothing to do with Washington School? That you had no test for Washington School?
Washington has a playground planned, and so that's an element of site utilization, but it's not building footprint.
Okay, because
And-
the soil testing investigation, didn't we have trouble with that playground after we put it in? It was flooding all the time, and they had to change the mat and everything. And what are we going to put right in that same place?
Well, there was an issue with drainage, but in the area that we're looking at the site, I'm not remembering it involving that. This is actually higher up in the lawn area.
It's not going to replace that other one?
No, no, that other one has to stay for the other student use.
Okay.
Yes.
Under checking DEP statuses for underground storage tanks or areas of recorded contamination, is underground storage tank oil tanks? Yes?
That's one of them, yes.
And if we find some that have been abated properly with sand or something, but they're still there, do we have to take them out, or can you?
They check the conditions that are found and determine whether they're in compliance with regulations or not, and report on that condition. So if they have been registered and properly removed, if they've been registered and properly remediated, that's one of the results that would come up in that evaluation.
But if they have to be taken out, then that's going to be an additional expense that's not calculated thus far?
Well, that would be one of the points of doing the investigation.
Okay.
And why we, it's a good example of why we need to do this quite far in advance of making our final decision, because that would be the type of thing that if there were bad news or a bad news surprise to it, could really, blow the costs out of the water on a certain aspect of it.
To address that question, on the next page that starts on item 4, the third category down called environmental, at the lower part of the page, it says, it refers back to the question 2, but it's the second bullet, a response action outcome, an RAO. Report has to be prepared by this same person, this LRSP, for any site meeting trigger conditions listed in the law. And if they find something in there, that's where it gets reported,
Thank you.
like the question you were asking. So, going back,
Any other questions regarding this? Please.
okay. Going back to the previous page then again, a very logical question came up regarding why the little addition at Sylvan School had the same fees shown as for the larger additions at the high school and Union and Pierpont. And it is kind of counterintuitive, but it goes to the triggers that you have to do review if you find these conditions have been met. And that little addition increases the footprint just like the others do, and it requires the same study. The Lincoln School is the same budget for the two-school classroom addition is the same budget as the addition for the elevator and lobby at the side of the kindergarten center. But the Lincoln School is not disturbing any site. It's not increasing the footprint. It's standing on top of the existing building. So that's why that one, rather than Sylvan, is the one that is smaller. Sylvan has the same, or the kindergarten center has the same triggers as those other larger ones where the area of the building standing on the ground is increasing. And item 4, we're hoping clears away a little of the fog about what each term means. Civil site investigation, soil testing investigation, environmental review, and hazardous materials review. So the civil work is, like it sounds, survey work and research into all of the state databases regarding all kinds of factors, floodplain, wetlands, any of the things that are triggering environmental review. So at the bottom of that category, we summarized, parking lots, the field design at the high school, stormwater management at all of the facilities, soil conservation district applications, and planning board. And planning board is an advisory review, but it is one of the steps that is in the process. Soil testing investigation is the geotechnical reporting on subgrade and soil conditions. And that is looking for environmental contaminants. That's particularly why the field, the high school field was asked for in this pre-referendum stage. Groundwater levels, that's why Union was added, because Union has this remarkable existing condition that has water infiltration coming in areas where you wouldn't expect it to. The others will also, like for example at the Union addition, that's going to need geotechnical, Pierpont is going to need geotechnical investigation just like the others for soil bearing capacities, the foundation conditions, but it didn't contain one of the two early triggers, and that's why that has been pushed off to post-referendum status at Pierpont. If there's anything like rock involved, we want to discover that in advance. I once did a project where we had borings all around the corners of a fairly regular building profile, and the contractor called us up and he said, "You've got to come out and see this." And so when we came out, there was this excavation with this large mound of rock in the middle, like we had discovered the mountaintop, exactly surrounded by the borings that we took. And it was a cost impact to the project. So that's something that comes out of the geotechnical, is we look for anything in the substrate that's not visible. You have glacial residue from when the glaciers came through, and that terrain has gravels, sands, silts, and some, boulders, but bedrock is not one of the ones that we usually encounter over here. So that's why we think we can still go after referendum for most of the sites. The environmental is the one that digs into these things. It is the one we watch most carefully. The preliminary assessment report is part of that large block of paper that you saw. It's about half of that is what we're referring to here as the preliminary assessment. And that is just the nature of this kind of project under New Jersey law for a state agency. And it's to prevent us from making decisions to move ahead on something that later on becomes prohibited by some other condition. So it's a look ahead, and we're talking about spending something in the order of 0.5% of the project budget is invested in this prudent due diligence phase. And DOE, when we submit for that, once the board decides on the exact configuration they want to move ahead with, they look for prior approvals, and that's this statement that you were referring to, that all of this stuff has to happen in advance or we lose our timing on the cycle. And here's the exhibit, here's the case I was referring to earlier. Hazardous Materials Consulting. We actually did go out and get 2 proposals. In the third line there, you'll see they ranged from $43,000 to $70,000. And the figure presented in the chart is $78.95. The reason for that is, once we received the proposals, if you went back to that second point on the selection process, the comprehension of the service requested, they had missed what we were requesting. And we reminded them that it was for pre-referendum services at this time and not anything that we need later on, to keep that initial cost of at-risk dollars as low as possible. Now, once we got into that range, we found that McCabe Environmental was the one who had what we needed, because they had been so instrumental over the last 20 years in getting data on these specific buildings. So in their files, they have records of, you have it in your AHIRA reports too, but I can get an instant answer from that consultant on whether or not we need to budget for asbestos removal in the plaster in a building. And because so much testing has been done. We might not have every area, but we have enough it's a pretty good basis for our estimates to be alerted in advance about that. So we could get that for that lower cost from that office, and that was the reason that ultimately that we selected that company. Do you have any more points? What have I not answered?
It's not that you have any answers, but I have another question on the referendum. Am I okay to answer that now? For 2 things. If we are in the new cafeteria, should we go for our board meeting, are we going to hear these blowers all the time?
What did you say?
Are we going to, yeah, you heard me. That won't be, right?
It's going to be a new mechanical system.
I'm not sure that actually worked into the strategic planning
I know.
committee, but later we'll address that. But
There's less space restrictions in that facility, which makes a difference in the size of the ductwork and the registers that you can put in.
And where they're located.
And where they're
not
located.
So low.
Just one question on the facade, can I answer that?
oh, please.
The one that was provided, the renewal example that was provided, which is...
For the facade treatment,
Correct.
yes.
Is this what you're really projecting it to look like, or do you have any more updates?
No,
Oh, good.
no. It's an example of where a building had a relatively unattractive and unmaintained facade, and they employed certain renewal techniques to make it look attractive or, well maintained.
Definitely.
Okay. So that is not designed yet. The facade treatment for this building is not designed at this point, because that's a whole process to go in and make sure we're covering all of the attributes. It's not just replacing non-thermal break, uninsulated windows with modern glazing systems. It's how we handle the integration of the chilled water in a cooling scenario. How we integrate the appearance of the building to the very nice, stately 1922 original structure in a better way than was done on the original.
And
So,
when-
go ahead.
I'm just saying, when will we have an idea of what your design would be?
Well, that's part of what gets studied in schematic design, so that we get more definition. The idea is that at each decision point for the board, you have more information on which to make an informed decision. That's the whole purpose of this. And so we delve down beyond concept level into schematic design in order to review the more specific information about each project, specifically what rooms and spaces would be included in the additions, and that helps us refine the cost estimates, because you want those to be very accurate. The entire project team has to live with the values that are established in that schematic design process. And those have to hold up through a couple of years, since it takes so long to get a building planted.
So I'm sorry, I ducked over here. I was just talking with Mrs. LeBrere. I think, and I don't know if this is the right breakdown of costs, the same breakdown of costs that she was speaking of. But so in the purchase order description, it's in our packet from you. It's a purchase order overview for this activity, and starting on page 9, there are breakdowns by school of the costs. Is that what we were?
This is the source breakdown for the chart.
So is this the level of detail that we were asking for, or no? You want one level below that?
This does reference back the dollar numbers to the specific paragraphs in the proposal, but the proposal from the environmental consultant has additional explanation in it.
Okay, of this.
This would have been multiplied from the level it's at to include all of that, but we'll certainly be able to provide that.
Okay, thank you.
And so, just to clarify, the additional consultant bid that you said that you did request and review, was that just for the environmental line item, or was that for more elements?
And the civil engineer.
Okay.
Any questions, further questions? Yes,
Just one,
Mr. Neely?
Mr. Cullen, on the soil testing investigation, that exceeds February. Is that the only component that you would need to complete? Because I thought February was a key milestone for delivering the assessment, no?
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding the question.
the
The soil
environmental-
investigation line item
I'm looking at the spreadsheet,
looks like this.
due
Right.
diligence procedures,
Right,
okay? And the second one down, soil testing investigation,
that's right.
you have December to April. And
No,
the others...
Excuse me one second. They're looking at something a little differently. They don't have those last columns on the right.
Okay. I'm just, well,
I
let
had
me
a
summarize
conversation
them real
with
quick.
Corey in your office about the timing of all these events, and he had
Oh,
said that
right.
the soil testing investigation would go on December through April. And he had indicated that would not hold anything up, but it was just an ongoing process. But
Yeah,
if you
that-
want to speak to that.
Yeah, that's
Right.
the key thing, Mr. Kelly, that's right. Would that hold up?
The reason it lists that is because we're entering the winter condition where the soils are more problematic for that investigation work.
So is your question, is there a risk in February to
Correct.
making a decision that
Right.
then we'd have one of these, right? Yeah, so is there a risk of a surprise coming that after we've decided to move ahead that?
Well, that's a good
Specifically because of that, you know?
Yeah, that's a good question. On the scale of factors that affect what goes into DOE for these applications, that's a relatively low level impact for us, because it's something that we have other sources for from previous projects that have been done. We have the boring reports in our file from this construction that was added at the high school, which is very near to the field. And that's the one for environmental conditions. We have the soils reports for the Union addition that was plugged onto the back of that building. So I don't expect something, if it's delayed by winter conditions, to be a decision factor that hits us with a surprise, because we do have those supplementary pieces of information in the file.
But in addition to that, that would be one of the first things we get the engineers moving quickly to get in their schedule.
So is that a projection in the event of a disastrous winter, or is that projection based on how much time it takes to do it?
Disastrous. A disastrous winter.
So it was like last winter, you'd be done by Christmas. Right.
It's a fairly short process, taking a few days, and then the engineering analysis taking 2 weeks.
But it also is coordinating with the schools and what activities are going on, because if there's a machine or a backhoe, we'd want to make sure it's coordinated with each school.
Ask another.
Yes.
Given moving forward, on all of these work streams, at what point in time will you feel confident in your estimates for the different components of the projects?
Okay. The way I have this laid out, the estimates would not be revisited as a uniform cycle or process for the next 2-month period while we're gathering the new information and while we're using the information from the long-range facilities plan investigation to test school models. So those are where we verify how many rooms we're able to get classified as eligible cost. And when we have that part done, that's what takes December and January, then we go back and revisit the estimates with that tuned up understanding of, are we building 11,000 feet or 10,500 or 13,000, and that's where the development of the design needs to happen. That's where we have to have the information from the environmental input to see if there's any factors coming in there. So it'll take us that long to get back to the cycle where we test it. But it's one of the most crucial tests we have, because the process has to survive that for all of the development time, all of the procurement time, all of the construction time in a staged, complex arrangement. And the budgets have to survive all the way out through the end of that. So it is the most crucial estimate that we compile.
Also, separate from PSA, the board is on the list of activities looking ahead. The board should entertain sometime in January, February, bringing on board a project management firm who would be, assuming we go forward with a referendum and successful, would be the project manager. But in the preliminary stage, what that company would do for us, the last time those either here, remember we had Epic working as the project manager, would also work independently, and I would imagine also a little bit in concert with what you're doing to help refine and solidify estimates. And that's something that we would do. And we've already have, Mr. Kelly and I have already discussed a couple of firms that are out there that we know of that we might look at. But even in the initial stage, before we make the leap to the ballot, and then the leap to a victory in the ballot, having the project manager as a consultant to help make sure that we're not underestimating, overestimating plans. So that would be another check. I don't want to use the term check and balance, but you know what I mean, a way to verify and double check data.
In previous projects, the sooner that the construction manager comes on, the better it is for the estimating.
Right.
And then we work as a team
Yeah.
with that.
And Mr. Kelly's in the process right now of putting together the potential for an RFP to go out so that we can in December or January have that conversation.
So just to clarify then, we're looking at early February for firmer numbers? Okay. That are informed by the environmental study, that are informed by the ongoing review?
Yeah, also going through the design process and having the board say, well, I don't like that, can we change it? You know, during that whole process. As far as an elevation, like,
Okay. I guess part of the reason I asked is because I think those more refined numbers will help us have those conversations, right? So it will be more clear to us and to the community what the trade-offs are behind some of the components. And so I just want to make sure that we're leaving ourselves enough time to have those discussions with the numbers that are on firmer footing in terms of the whole process.
Yeah, in terms of that, again, I don't want to get too far ahead in basis of just making sure that tonight we feel maybe more comfortable in moving forward with the project. But, you know, I have the timeline from the last referendum, different time, different place, but how we set things up from, you know, from Lyndhurst, from West, from a bunch of schools, how when they started to get that more definitive dialogue going. And there will be a couple of different options for us to follow. So, you know, I'm confident that in working, let's say, when the calendar turns in January, for a month of planning with whoever those planners are going to be, to come up with, you know, what the process and the time frame will be okay with that. Because, you know, we're not most of us here are, you know, we're going into this first time, or at least the first time in the chairs we're in right now. But, you know, we have a lot of neighbors and a lot of friends who have gone through this as recently as a month ago. So, you know, we're going to pick what's best for us and go forward. But that's when the dialogue gets real.
And I think during the next several weeks, we've talked about setting the calendar for next year, and we will probably want to build into that some ability to have some extra meetings if it's needed to discuss this.
Yeah, I think from the board level, I mean, I think, you know, when we try never, and I think it's worked fine, never have committee meetings just for the sake of having them. Sure. But, you know, the theory is every Monday night is potential. We may find some months where every Monday night there'll be a reality of a meeting or so.
Very good. Any other questions from board members regarding this? No? Yes, Mr.
In the environmental section, it says a background review is performed to identify any areas of concern and provide a recommendation of no further action or alternatively for additional investigation. So in your experience with sort of worst case scenarios around additional areas of investigation, would you still be able to meet the early February deadline that you propose in the due diligence procedures section?
Yeah. This is where we have the experience from the previous referendum cycle on these exact same sites where we did not encounter ancient cemeteries and you know, other things that were real showstopper type of issues. We did have a historic review on Union School because it's in a registered historic neighborhood. Not the building itself, but the neighborhood it's in. And they were very concerned with the front appearance of the building, and the reason we were allowed to plug on this addition on the back side that gave you some critically needed educational space was because it didn't impact the neighborhood in a serious way. You may not know it, but one of the conditions of that approval was that we did not destroy the fabric of the original building any more than necessary. So if you walk into the gymnasium, which is completely surrounded by construction on all sides, where the windows were, there's wall panels, and on the outside of those walls, there's a firewall. But inside the cavity, the original windows are still there. We didn't remove them, we just covered them. So we did the least damage to the historic fabric of the original structure. So it's not anything you're going to uncover anytime in the near future, but it got down to that level of discussion with the historic reviewers as to what we were doing. We're again looking at developing something on the rear portion of that. And in fact, this program is at the moment including the restoration or care of the front pediment columns that are having a problem at their base with deterioration. So that's one of the elements that got included in the review of what should be in the repairs.
Very good. Is it questions? Okay. Thank you very much for myself, and I'm sure for the rest of the board. It was very helpful. Really added, depth of understanding for me as to what this is.
Business administrator can relay any other questions that come up after the meeting.
Very good. Thank you. So returning now to the agenda, and we'll ask, I'm just to put this out. So on the agenda, we've got the report of the superintendent, report of the president, meeting open to the public, new business. We go through the agenda. I'm going to depart from that. We have we've been requested to hear a student issue this evening. It requires being in executive session. Thank you. What I'd like to do so that those people are not waiting too long is that after we go through the public comment, then we will go into executive session for the purpose of hearing a family issue, and we will at that point have to clear the room because we don't want to try to do that inside the small room where we normally have executives. So I'm just advising that what we'll do, and then anybody would be welcome to come back after we're done with executive session. But so at this point, I would ask the superintendent for a report, please.
A brief one. Congratulations to our re-elected board members, Mrs. Libera, Mr. Jones, and Mr. Healy. And they'll be sworn in at the reorganization meeting on January 2nd. Remember that for the second year in a row, our first board meeting, the reorg meeting, is on a Tuesday night because of the holiday falling on the Monday night. Okay? And once again, welcome to Dr. Alati. The self-evaluation review, I think Mr. McLean emailed you all today. We got it about 4 o'clock this afternoon. We could talk about that at December's meeting. The fourth year in a row that we were awarded the Safety Incentive Program Award from our School Alliance Insurance Fund, which indicates that the operation of our building and grounds is in very good order and also leads to a reduction in our insurance premium. And congratulations to Mr. Paterno and to members of his staff. The audit report will be done in December, and as I noted in my communication to you, it was a clean report, which meant no recommendations, no findings at all, which is very uncommon for an audit report. And again, congratulations, Mr. Kelly, his office staff, and the administrators and the supervisors who manage and moderate the budget. And our auditor will be here, and you'll get a copy of the report ahead of the December meeting. Our student rep already mentioned about the football game on Friday night and the outstanding sports program we've had. That sports dinner will be outstanding too. And if anybody wants to join Mrs. Jones and me at that dinner, let me know tonight. This is American Education Week, which means our pre-K to 6 have one session days on the 16th, and it's the 17th. I had a typo in my column. They have the whole day off for the conferences. And the all-school play is, which happens many times because we've had a successful football program where the high school all-school play and the football game are on at the same time Friday night. But if you want to get to both, there is a performance Saturday night as well. Okay? And that's it for now.
Thank you. So moving to the report of the president, which I will likewise keep short. Since our last meeting, A couple of activities. There were committee meetings for the strategic planning, the finance and budget, and building and grounds. I'm sure each leader of those groups will comment on those as we go through the balance of the meeting after executive session. We will likely have a committee meeting on the 4th of December.
We'll have finance and curriculum and instruction for sure, and then
Okay.
we'll see about the others.
Okay. As was mentioned, I received today the consolidated self-evaluations. I have not sent it out yet to the group. It's an 18-page report. We'll plan on going through. I'm going to sit with Mr. Hurley and go through it, and then we'll review it as a group in December, at the December meeting. Do people want hard copies of that, or can I email it? Hard copy, one hard copy?
Would you like me to get it out there?
Yes, yeah, so,
Want me to get
yeah,
it?
that'd be fine.
Okay.
And
I'll send an electronic copy to everybody, and I'll follow up with a hard copy as well. Okay, so you'll have it ahead of December's meeting. You want it ahead of that, or is it okay to come in the packet?
I'll pick mine up.
All right, we'll have it ready. We'll have it ready.
Yeah.
I'll either get it out to you.
No
ahead of-
surprises in it. It was, similar to past years and such, so. We've had, this year we have contracts, well, in June, at the end of June, we have contracts expiring with the Administrators Association and the Supervisors Association. We've had our first meeting with the administrators, and we'll discuss that a little bit in executive session, and we are planning on having a meeting with the supervisors. I've reached out to them looking for, if it's possible to get a meeting in before the end of the year on that. So, as I mentioned, the 2018 calendar will be sitting, with Mr. Hurley, and we'll be developing that as well. That's it for my comments. Any questions for Mr. Hurley or for myself? None. We will move on at 8:32 to comments from the public. As we've been doing for the last several months, this is, we'll make this period available to the public for any comments on anything that's on the agenda or any other topic that someone may wish the board to hear. At 8:33, we'll close the floor to the public for comment. And we're going to go into executive session, go off the agenda and go into executive session for the purposes of a hearing. As I mentioned, we'll have to ask folks to leave the room. Well, we'll need a motion on this, but we anticipate taking action and approximate time, do you know? That we'll be back in public session?
20 minutes, half hour? 20
Half
minutes.
an hour, yeah, 20 minutes to a half an hour back in executive session, we would imagine, but there'll be somebody at the door if you want to come back, we would prevent that.
And Mr.
So I need a motion, please,
So moved.
to move into executive session for the purpose of discussing the student issue. Action will be taken and will
Maybe.
be seconded by Mr. Rowland. Yeah, voice vote. Yeah, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No? So, okay, we're moving into executive session.
And Mr.
Okay, thank you. We're back in public session, and we will move into the new business part of the agenda where there's actions to be taken. We'll follow the normal process where we ask the committee chair for the subject matter to talk about committee meetings, reports, anything that's going on, give a broad overview of the items that we will be looking at, and then we'll discuss them, and then we can move into formally moving them and voting on them. So we'll start, please, Mrs. Ahmed, with personnel.
I'd like to move number 1, Korean Ogden, retirement for her as an elementary teacher. 2, Deborah Librato, approve an unpaid family medical leave. 3, Caitlin Ratz, unpaid child rearing leave of absence for her. 4, Amy Faulkner as a long-term substitute teacher. 5, Shelley Chang as a leave replacement elementary teacher. 6, Nikki Katakides, substitute science teacher. Lauren Miller, assistant at Lincoln School effective, to approve her.
Spinarco.
Narco, I should know that name. 8, to conduct 3 workshops. Kevin Sanchez, 9, teacher assistant at Union School, coaching assignments, number 10, to approve, Justin Van Dyke and Patrick Walsh. 11, substitute teacher, to approve her as the substitute teacher, Nubia Bravo, and the substitute teacher assistant, 12, to also hire her. And 13, travel reimbursements as follows.
Thank you. As these are moved, is there a second before Mr. Healy seconds them? And so are there any questions or comments from anyone, including the superintendent or business administrator, regarding motions 1 through 13 under personnel?
I just want to recognize Ms. Ogden. She'll be retiring in June, so we have a way to go. But she is the science specialist that works with our elementary students. And since we did the reorganization, and she's focused on the K-3 level, she always did an excellent job. And in the last 2 years, it's really been extraordinary and very, very influential in how we use Lincoln Woods. And it's too early to say goodbye. It's still June, but I wanted to recognize her contributions. And did I steal your thunder?
No.
Oh, I thought you were going to say that. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
You can second that.
I do second that, absolutely.
Any additional comments or questions regarding the motions in front of us? No? Hearing none, we ask the secretary to please pull the board.
Mrs. Ahmed?
Yes.
Dr. Alati?
Yes.
Mr. Healy?
Yes.
Mrs. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Obrera?
Yes.
Mr. Mazzone?
Yes.
Dr. Racine? Mr. Rowland?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Motion's carried.
Thank you. Moving on to curriculum and instruction, and I would ask Mrs. Jones to take us through that, please.
There are 7 resolutions for board consideration for curriculum and instruction. Resolution 1, approval of additional field trips. Resolution 2, approval of out-of-district placements for 3 students. Resolution 3, approval for home instruction for 4 students. Resolutions 4, 5, and 6 require us to affirm the superintendent's decision for 3 HIB investigations. And Resolution 7 is a student matter. Be it resolved, the student shall be disenrolled from the Rutherford School District 21 days after the notice date unless the parent files a petition of appeal with the Commissioner of Education. Be it further resolved that the Board of Education authorizes the Board Secretary to file a petition with the Commissioner of Education to collect tuition for the students' attendance for the 2017-2018 school year until the parent establishes domicile in the Rutherford School District. Anything else that you'd like to add?
No.
I just have one question on the out-of-district placements. We rescinded one. Where did that child go? Was appointed, then we rescinded. Is that child move out of district?
No, they could have been placed in another.
But that's not.
It could be come back to district, could be placed in another out-of-district placement, so you have to rescind one contract and then get
Right,
another
I get
contract.
that, but then I don't know what.
Well, we can't identify a student.
No,
So,
I-
yeah,
We wait
no.
till the contract
Where
comes
does-
in. We wait till the contract comes in to do it on that list. So there could have been withdrawn, placed somewhere else, but that school has the type of contract.
I got it.
Right.
Thank
Oh,
you.
I get your point. Yeah, we don't have the contract yet.
Thank you.
And if they come back to district, we'll never have some kids come back. Right,
Yeah,
right.
I just was laying in limbo. Okay, thank you.
No questions? So would you formally move 1 through 7?
I'd like to move resolutions 1 through 7 for the curriculum instruction.
Thank you. Seconded by
Second.
Mrs. Cabrera. Last chance for comments. Seeing none, ask the secretary to please pull the board.
Mrs. Ahmed?
Yes.
Dr. Alati?
Can I abstain on some of them?
Yes, you may.
Okay, so yes to 1, 2, 3, and 7, and I'm abstaining from 4, 5, and 6.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Healy?
Yes.
Mrs. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Librera?
Yes.
Mr. Mazzone?
Yes.
Dr. Racine?
Yes.
Mr. Rowland?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Motion's carried. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving into finance, I would ask Mrs. Librera to please take us through that.
Sure. There's 9 motions on the finance section of the agenda tonight. The Finance Committee did meet last week, and we reviewed a couple of the items we've already discussed tonight. One of the things we reviewed were the positive audit results that Mr. Hurley commented on earlier. So again, thanks to Mr. Kelly and his team's work for that. We reviewed some of the detail that PSA presented tonight as well. We talked preliminarily about the 2017-2018 budget, which according to Mr. Kelly does look like it will be somewhat favorable this cycle in terms of the way that some of the expenses are lining up or looking like they're lining up. So he may want to add more detail to that. And lastly, we talked just a little bit about the need for the emergency procurement that's on the agenda tonight for the unplanned sewer work that was required.
Thank you. Anyone have comments or questions regarding the motions that will be made or the reports? No? Would you formally move?
Sure. So the first 5 items are the standard finance motions. I do want to point out motion number 6, which is to accept with gratitude a donation from Church Alive in Rutherford, which graciously donated $5,000 toward the sensory gym equipment for children with special needs. Number 7, educational service contract agreement. And number 8 is the payment of the emergency contract, which I just mentioned. And number 9 is transportation contracts. So I'd like to move items 1 through 9.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Mizell. Last opportunity for any questions or comments on any of these motions?
Again, thank the generosity of Church Alive, who's donated a great deal to our special ed projects, and we certainly appreciate that. For those of you who don't know, the sensory gyms are in Washington Lincoln School. They're used by our ABA autistic classes as a way to both. It is a gym, but it's more just in terms of students who have trouble with sensory receptors, either overstimulation, understimulation. It's a way to do OT and PT for that. So we appreciate their generosity.
Any additional comments? No? Hearing none, I ask the secretary to please poll the board.
Mrs. Ahmed?
Yes, the motions 2 through 8. No,
9.
2 through 9, but no one checked number 1 and number 1, check number 020490.
I'm
All the
sorry.
rest are okay, though.
Just the one check, 020490?
Yeah.
So
Okay.
you're abstaining on that, or you're voting no?
Dr. Olati?
I'm going to abstain on number 1 and yes for the rest.
Thank you. Mr. Healy?
Yes.
Mrs. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Librera?
Yes.
Mr. Mazzone?
Yes.
Dr. Racine?
Yes.
Mr. Rowland?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Motion's carried. Thank you.
Thank you. We are absent, have not reassigned the policy chair at this point.
I
but
do have
don't
something I
think-
want to say about policy.
So, some comments, yes?
Yeah, on December 7th, representatives from Strauss Esme will come up and train a core group of administrators, supervisors, and secretaries on the interactive portion, which really is going to be key for administrative use of this massive document. So at that point, I mean, the timing of that's very good because I didn't want to do, there have been some minor revisions that have come up with policy that, I was hoping to make it easier editing and by waiting until we got to training. So by the time we're ready to come up with a new policy chair, we'll be ready to move some of the policy that we have. As I mentioned, I think for expediency, the mandated policies should just come through. The ones where we have homegrown or are allowed the latitude to have input, we should have committees discussion. So we're moving towards the final step of the transition to Strauss Esme.
Very good. And there are no No motions, resolutions for action tonight, so will anybody else comments regarding policy, questions? No. We'll move on then to building and grounds, and I would ask Mr. Mazzone to walk us through that, please.
Certainly. So since the last time we met, the Buildings and Ground Committee did meet on the 6th. When we met, there were several items that were discussed. One of those was the 2018-2019 budget, looking at capital funding and discussing some high-level projects, things such as boilers, the high school, air handlers in the gymnasium, the gutters at Union School, various other projects. There was time spent speaking to the comprehensive maintenance plan, which is actually one of our items for approval this evening. And then the balance of the time was spent speaking to the referendum, which PSA, I think, did a nice job clarifying and explaining our questions. So, there are 3 motions to put forward to the group. If there's no questions about the committee meetings, I'll put those forward. So the first, number 1 is the comprehensive maintenance plan, which is a 3-year maintenance plan documenting activities for improvements to be done to our schools. The second resolution is change orders, specifically for the Murray Paving and Concrete LLC, as it pertains to the Rutherford Library, specifically the new Life Skills Center. Total dollar amount $6,316.13. And then finally, the last motion would be the project application, which PSA, again, we discussed back on October 23, and then there was clarification provided this evening in a grand total amount of $263,315. Also included in the packet, I think, pertaining to motion 2 is an explanation of that comprehensive maintenance plan.
Motion 1.
Motion 1. Questions, comments? So formally move them, I suppose.
I'd like to put motions 1 through 3.
And seconded by Mrs. Jones. Last chance for questions, comments. Hearing none, ask the secretary to pull the board, please.
Mrs. Ahmed,
Yes.
Dr. Oladi,
Yes.
Mr. Healy,
Yes.
Mrs. Jones,
Yes.
Mrs. Lebrera,
Yes.
Mr. Mazzone,
Yes.
Dr. Racine,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. McLean.
Yes.
Motion's carried. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the resolutions for this evening. Moving on now to old business or any business. Is there anything that someone wishes to bring in front of the board or any reports?
Just a reminder that December 4th, we are playing curriculum and instruction. We will be in the beginning of scheduling, believe it or not, for 2018-19. So new courses that have to get into the course offerings for students. We usually remember every year. Sometimes we just have the blurb to approve, and then the full curriculum follows. We will probably have a finance committee meeting that night, which will be a preliminary one just to set the calendar for budget preparation. I don't think there'll be a need for the others, but if there is, I'll let you know. So sometime after Thanksgiving, early in the week, I'll let you know about the week ahead. But we can plan on curriculum and instruction probably 7-ish, and finance to follow. Okay, and I think that's it. I thought there was 2 things, but that's it.
Hey, thank you. Mrs. Jones.
We, Mr. Hurley and Mr. Kelly and I did attend the school board's workshop in the end of October. It's always interesting to listen back to lots of good things. I did take the governance for when you are elected official, they will allow you to take it or on for election just prior to the election. So I have completed my training. But Sally, you have to take governance or legal update. But this is the first term of your newly elected one. You have to take the next one. Sergio has to take orientation, and I believe you're on 2?
2.
So at some point in the next couple of months, you can either take it online or go for the training. Sergio, I would recommend that you go for the training. The orientation is wonderful on the weekend program that they have. It really gives you quite a bit. That is that. On Saturday is the Delegates Assembly. I've registered. I am having trouble working out my ride, but I will go over the two resolutions that are on it. There's other things on it, updates on certain things, but just quickly. The Middletown Board of Education has, thank you to Eddie, he fixed it so I can connect here, which is a little bit easier than my writing. Middletown Board of Education is proposing additional policy, NJSBA policy opposing any reduction of a district's state aid amounts from the original preliminary amount statutorily provided by the New Jersey Department of Education immediately following the governor's budget address. And to the fact that last year they lost $356,772, which is why they're proposing it. The NJSBA then writes a resolution to tighten it up as they see fit. So what we would be voting on probably, unless there's people from the audience or the delegates rather, that add something else to the resolution and so forth. So it can get a little bit, it can go on for a while or it can go quickly. The NJSBA believes that it is detrimental to students, school programs, and taxpayers to have the state reduce projected school aid figures to school districts after the Commissioner of Education notifies school districts that their state aid entitlements by the statutory state of notification, whatever that means. The other thing that is Resolution 2 is from Bloomfield. And the Bloomfield Board proposes new policy language that states finally will fund all special education costs in the current year, on a current year basis, and limit the increases of out-of-district providers to 2% tax levy cap. In other words, they can go up higher, and because we are kept at 2%, that's what their proposal is. So if I get there, I'll see how it goes. But I just thought that you might be interested in what those proposals are. I'm sorry, my voice is going.
Thank you. Any questions? No? Okay, then at 9:29, we would open the floor to any member of the public wishing to make a comment, again, on any subject. At 9:30, it did change. 9:30, we close the floor to public comment. And we have already conducted the business we needed to in executive session. So at this point, we can entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved. Rivera, and seconded by Ahmed. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, members, for the evening.
Thank you.